All right. It says we're live. Hello, everybody. How are you doing this evening? So tonight's topic is difficult conversations. It's the stuff that comes up in life. We all have, and we all have to have occasionally. Was a topic that came up in my networking community. Had a few guys kind of asking me about it, and it's actually a subject that I'm not necessarily great at. So I've invited a friend of mine to come on as a guest tonight, and he's fairly experienced in this matter. So he's going to help me with it, and we're going to get into a few different aspects of it because it's a very broad subject and it can go many different ways. We won't be able to cover everything tonight, of course, but so a couple of things to start on it is, with difficult conversations is, are you delivering bad news or are you receiving it? Because there's two different ways to have the conversation and handle the conversation based on those. And then, of course, with that comes, if you're on the receiving end of it, was that expected or unexpected? And when you're delivering it, how you handle the people on the other side, same thing. Were they expecting it or not expecting it? So there's a bunch of different directions to go in and a lot of topics to cover on here. So with that, I'm going to bring Jerry in and we'll carry on from here.
Hello, Bentley.
Oh. Hi, Jerry. How are you this evening?
I am doing great.
Excellent. So we're on the subject of difficult conversations. This is something that I know I'm not great at. And being in the corporate world, I know you have lots of experience at this. So I'm certainly interested in picking your brain and improving my own skills at this as we go on through tonight.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like I said in the beginning there's a couple of different things to go at is are you delivering the bad news or are you receiving it? Because that changes the conversation and how you're going to have it. And then, was it expected or unexpected on your end of the receiving? Same thing on the other side. How do you approach having a difficult conversation with somebody who probably doesn't know that it's coming? So those are things to go at. What are your thoughts from there?
So, we, myself and you and a few other people from the 10% group, this became a topic of conversation. And like you mentioned, it's a very broad topic. And so in this episode, what hopefully we're going to cover are sort of what type of situations you run into. Because there are, we're going to talk about maybe 6 or 7, but there are dozens of them out there that you can run into. And they're all very different and they take different techniques to resolve. But what we are going to cover in this episode is something that covers the vast majority of the situations, and that is your mindset and your skills. And
Excellent.
then hopefully we can cover the techniques in a later conversation.
Excellent. Very good. Yes, definitely involves a mindset. I know when you and I were speaking earlier and talking about this, was actually something that was brought up that I never really took into consideration before. A lot of times when I've approached having a difficult conversation with somebody where I'm the one delivering it, it's kind of a bit of a work up the nerve and you go into it and then you just sort of plow ahead. I kind of realized when you mentioned it, was the conversation expected or unexpected? If the other person isn't expecting it and you plow forward like that, you kind of run them over. And so there's a bit of like you said, a mindset of if you're going to deliver the difficult conversation to introduce it and then give them a minute to actually sit there and absorb it before you run them over with the conversation, so to speak. That was something I never really took into consideration very well before.
Well, again, there is so many different situations where this happens, and 6 or 7 that come to mind that we talked about. One being hostage negotiation, which I am not an expert or know much about, but that's probably the most difficult conversation you can have because it literally is a life and death situation. But then you run into others like just delivering bad news. And bad news can be delivered both at a personal level and at a business level. if you've been in the military or you've been in the police force, having to deliver bad news to a family can be very difficult. They're not expecting it. Oftentimes, you might not realize you're going to have to do it, and it's a last moment thing. But those are difficult situations when you have to talk to somebody about a loss of a family member.
Definitely.
And not only how do you handle it, but how are they going to handle it? And there's also the business side of it. Oftentimes, you have to give bad news to your clients because something happened. Might be something they've done. It might be something you've done. It might be something another vendor has done. But you have to be able to convey that information to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings up a couple other business situations, because tough conversations happen in real life. Like I mentioned, hostage negotiation, delivering bad news. It happens at business levels. I had mentioned delivering bad news at a business level. But there are many levels with the business side. It could be a sales negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
And those can be very difficult conversations because you both want to get something out of it. And depending on the people you're dealing with, they can be open and amenable to discussions, and some are not. And you have to be able to deal with both.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that comes up often is another type of business negotiation, and that's usually related to contracts. If you ever try to sit down and have two teams of lawyers agree on something, it's a very difficult, stressful conversation that usually runs over multiple days. So that is another type of situation. And then there's some in the public sector that you see a lot. I think we all like watching public debates.
Yes.
They're a lot of fun. I love watching Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro. They are just consummate debaters. And
surgical precision.
and they have all types of techniques, and they deal with all types of people. Jordan Peterson said, I never know what I get into when I go into one of these. They can be very nice up front and remain fairly open during the conversation. They can be very nice up front. You go into it, and all of a sudden it switches to attack mode. He says, and then I have some where they're not nice up front, but I still go into it because it's the challenge of what do you do? Now, we run into that, and I've run into that a lot if you do any type of speaking engagements. So if you're a salesperson, as an example, you might be giving a presentation to a crowd. If you're a professional speaker, then there are a lot of people who do this for a living, where you go out and you speak on specific topics for a group of people. You have to deal with hecklers who are going to try to give you a hard time. And that is very similar to open debates, except you're dealing with one person who's trying to throw you off what you're doing. Yes. And you learn how to deal with those. And that's one of the first things they teach you in sales. And you have options. You can, make yourself look good and make them look bad, which sometimes is fun. Oftentimes not productive, but very fun. Or you can take a higher road and make it where you're not doing that, but you're trying to win an ally. And oftentimes in business, that's very important.
Definitely.
And, last but not least, there's our personal life. So relationships with your spouse, with your children, with other people. And, I kind of list them almost right behind the hostage negotiation. Mainly
I've been in a few of those.
Exactly. Mainly for the reason of they are very emotionally charged. And when
Yes.
people are emotionally charged, they're not reasonable, they're not flexible. And you have to look at what you're really doing and saying. It's very easy to get angry, particularly if someone's taking shots at you.
Hmm.
It's oftentimes you can do things that can not only affect you and the person you're having the debate or the disagreement with, but other people like your children. I think we've all seen where people going through divorce will oftentimes use their children to beat the heck out of the other person. And that's not the road you want to take. Um, one, for several reasons, is children are actually understand what's going on. They learn and
Hmm.
they can see, maybe not initially, but over time, who's really caring about them, who's trying to take the high road, who's trying to be the good person versus I'm using you as a tool to beat your mom down or beat your dad down.
Right.
So those are just a few that come to mind.
Yep. Well, they are certainly definitely fall into the categories of the difficult situations. Like we said, our friend Peter kind of brings up the one of hostage negotiation all the time because, and shout out to Peter. Thank you for part of the idea of this topic and giving us a little bit of framework around it. Because, yeah, they probably do have the most difficult situations that there are as far as difficult conversations because they're negotiating with somebody who doesn't want to negotiate. They just want their demands met. And they're usually life and death situations and difficult negotiations. Those guys have negotiation skills I wish I had.
Well, to me, it's the risk involved. You oftentimes negotiate and have difficult conversations with people who don't want to.
Yes.
But like you said, hostage negotiation is a real life and death, and that's an immense amount of stress.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, like I said, the personal relationships can be as stressful. Maybe not life and death, but as stressful.
Sometimes it feels like it.
Absolutely.
I've had a
Uh,
few that have felt like it.
So, and that we just listed half a dozen, but in reality, there's probably close to 2 or 3 dozen different types of difficult conversation situations you can end up in. And as you said, the interesting part is you can be on the giving end of that, and sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes planned out, and you can be on the receiving end of it. Again, sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes not. There's plenty of times where you see trouble coming,
Hmm.
and you can prepare for it, even though you're on the receiving end. And then there are some times you never see it coming.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because I know that in particular, um, kind of a bit to do with my background and my upbringing. Small town, small farm. Generally speaking, raised to be a nice person, kind person. Um, very strict boundaries. I have them, and I usually allow people. And this is probably where my part of my problem is. I usually allow people to push right up to those boundaries before I stop them, and then from there it goes into instant difficult conversation as opposed to, like you said, preparing and guiding someone into that instead. So timing and initiation of them. Um, what's the best way to figure that out?
Um, well, again, it varies per situation. But if we look at the mindset you have to have and the basic skills you have to have, I think the first one we came up with as a group was being prepared, if
Hmm.
possible. Because someone, like we said, sometimes these things get thrown at you and you have no time to get prepared to give it or take it. But if you do and you have the chance to prepare for it, that can save you a lot of heartache and headache. One of
Hmm.
the things I did in corporate America for a while is for one of the Fortune 500 companies, tech companies. Um, I did troubleshooting for them, flying around the US to places that had critically down systems, and very stressful situations, because they're always last moment, and you fly into a particular city client and you arrive there and the CEO wants to know, you're going to have this fixed in 2 seconds, right? And those are very stressful situations. But one of the things that I learned over time and we got really good at is preparing for those. So even though it's last minute, I would go in there and we're expecting you to fix it now. And I would have the conversation with them about, I have a process I follow. You know, it's not going to happen in 30 minutes. It takes time, but I have to go through a process to identify what the problem is. You know, as much as I understand, as an example, your car doesn't run, I still have to figure out why it's not running. And so I'm going to go through these steps with your people to identify that and hopefully quickly resolve it if it can be. And if you are prepared and have those conversations with them up front, one, it settles them down, because instead of being in panic mode, they realize, okay, you're doing the right things. You have a process for this, and this makes sense. And so being prepared is a very good thing when you can, and can save you a lot of stress and a lot of heartache and headache. And I think most people respect it a lot when you come in and lay down, you know, this is what's going to happen. You know, I've solved a ton of these. This is the process. This is how we determine what's going wrong. This is how we identify it. These are the steps we need to do. And you do it and you find out what the situation is. And then you either fix it or deliver the news from there. But it gives them much more confidence in your handling it.
Okay. Excellent. So I guess in all reality, then for something like that, for like you said, the prepared ones, maybe beneficial to actually somewhat practice these. Find someone you can practice them with, so you're prepared dealing with it. Have a friend or something that you can have mock difficult conversations with, and have them throw things at you sideways to help you think on your feet, handle these in a quick basis. Is that a good idea? Is that a good technique?
That actually is a very good technique, and we do that a lot. But also sometimes that's depending on what you're working and what the situation is, what industry you're working in. Sometimes you don't get that luxury. When I first joined Oracle Corporation and they sent us out to do things, they would send us out on everything, whether we knew it or not. They'd hand you the manual as you're getting on the plane. Good luck. and you had to figure it out. And so when you do have the luxury of taking the time and getting prepared, it makes a huge difference. But sometimes you don't, and it's just trial by fire. And over time, you know, just like in metalworking, the fire hones you to a hardness and a sharpness that makes it work.
Okay. Excellent.
And one of the key, we didn't actually put an order to our list, but one of the key things, the mindset, is integrity. And it's about being honest all the time. And you know, there are many situations, particularly in business, but in the other situations and categories also, but particularly in business, it's very easy to drift away from the integrity and honesty side. Sales is a perfect example. when you're looking at closing that multi-million-dollar deal and there's, $100,000 worth of commission to you, is that included? Sure. It's very easy to stretch the truth. But one of the things I've always taught all my salespeople, and that I was taught by some of my mentors, is particularly in sales, if you're not honest about it, it will come back and haunt you more so than
Usually does.
anything else.
Yeah.
And it's not only just sales, but it's in dealing with people. And I had a bunch of employees, and I had a female employee who the client asked, get her off my project. She doesn't work with us. Get her off my project. And so I had to call that employee into my office, back to the office, and have the conversation with her about what happened. And if you're straight and honest, and you understand how some of this works, you can have that conversation very easily. And so I explained to her that, the client didn't have any particular, you did this bad or you did that bad, but you're just not a fit for them. For whatever reason, your personality clashes with them. And she took that very badly. And for me, it was an interesting time because it was the first time I had, and I was young at the time, had to do that to a woman, to a female. And she started crying. So learned a lot out of that. One, how to deal with that. And two, being honest with her about it. It's like, and I'm using the name Jane, but that's not her name, of you did nothing wrong. Everything is not always a fit. I've left clients because it wasn't a fit. I've been asked to leave because it wasn't a fit.
Yeah.
You're too aggressive for us. We don't like you. You're posse. That doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. Everything is not always a fit. You're a great employee. I'm not firing you. I've got 10 other projects I can put you on. But you have to understand that these things happen. And, there might even be a time it is your fault. But if you're upfront and honest with people, what I have found, as in her case and many other cases afterwards, they take it very well. And they learn to adjust from it. I'm still friends with her, and we laugh about that to this day. But if you're honest and you have integrity, it makes a difference. I'll throw one last one in there on the integrity. And like I said, as a salesperson, you can lose integrity when you see the shiny large diamond in front of you. As an employer, sometimes you have to be brutally honest with people, and that can be very difficult. And then sometimes the corporations will force you to do things that don't show integrity. I was running an organization, which was a part of a much broader organization, which was in a very large company, and they decided they're going to get rid of the whole division. And I had about 30 people I had to let go, and I had to have the conversation with them. And I never dealt with it on that level before. And corporate HR came down and said, here's the script. This is what you need to do. And there was a bunch of paperwork and other things. How do you get your COBRA and that sort of stuff? But the script was just very bad. The script read, Dear blank Bentley, thank you for your blank 5 years of service. And it was just this generic, really bad script on and it was supposed to be given to every person. And I had a small group. I only had about 30 people, but other managers I worked with had hundreds of people and was having their management team do it. But it's not being honest and it's not showing integrity. So what I did was actually not do the script, because I hired most of these people.
Mm-hmm.
I knew them all. I knew their families. And you sit down and you have an honest conversation with them. Bentley, this is what's going on. They're getting rid of the division. Has nothing to do with what you did. Has nothing to do with what I did, but it is what it is. And here's what they're providing for us. And the nice thing I could tell, which was actually the case with my employees, was great. After I let all 30 of you go, I get let go, which was actually how it was planned.
Yeah.
But being honest and having integrity in all those situations is key to having difficult situations, difficult conversations.
Yeah. It's always best when you do that. When, like you say, you keep your integrity. It's easy to keep your head up and know that, no matter how difficult it got, no matter how bad it was, you did it by your standards the right way.
Yes, because corporations will often waver, and people will often waver. But if you want to really win at difficult conversations, having the integrity, even when I'm talking to a client and giving bad news, is key into making it right.
Mm-hmm.
And people will respect you for that. You can go in and deliver very bad news, take bad actions, but they respect you for being honest and upfront with them. One of the things that I think you brought up was outcomes and goals.
Yeah.
Uh,
Going into, if you're initiating the conversation, having your goal or your outcome in mind beforehand can kind of help. Largely with the ones that I've had, I haven't had a whole lot of difficult ones in professional life. When I have, it's been somewhat on the adversarial side. Usually when I've had to have difficult conversations in my career in trucking, it was usually with law enforcement. So you're generally speaking going to lose those. Every now and then I was on the other side where we'd be doing something and actually have to hire law enforcement for assistance, and they come in thinking they're in charge, and you have to let them do their thing. And once they're done, ask the person or ask the group, especially if there's multiples, who's in charge. And one will generally step forward and say, I am. So always shook his hand and said, nice to meet you. Said, just want to be clear on this. You're not in charge. I am. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if we have an accident, we write on the report because the officer told me to. It's still my insurance. It's still my responsibility. It's still my customer. It's still my commodity. It all falls on me. So that means I'm in charge. We'll do things as best as we can, but the ultimate decision lands right here. I get to make it. Sometimes those are difficult to have with people that are not used to being on the receiving end of that type of a conversation.
Yes.
They have a tendency to stand there and look at you dumbfounded. And normally it was followed up. If this is a problem, feel free to excuse yourself and send your supervisor.
And that is very true. And, one of the things we teach as far as negotiation skills go, particularly in sales, is what outcome, what goal do you want?
Mm-hmm.
And in sales, what we really want anytime you're selling something to a client is a win-win situation. They're getting a product or a service that's really going to help them in their business at a reasonable price. And the win on your side is you're getting it where you're making money, added. So you always aim for the win-win. And that applies to not only sales. We talked about business negotiations. For a while there, I was used a lot to run the negotiations between legal teams on contractual things for a particular software company. And the client who wants to buy our software has his legal team. We have our own legal team. And if you know anything about lawyers, and sorry if anyone on here is a lawyer, but they don't want to give up anything.
No.
They're always right. They don't want to give up anything. And so as the negotiator, you're trying to get both sides to an agreement, to a win-win. And it always starts out very difficult because they don't want to give an inch on either side. And the point being, and what I often talk to them about is, because you'll ask, can you give up this if we trade you this? Or would you trade this for that? You know, if we do this wording, would you agree on this statement? So you're always trying to find a middle ground. But it's funny because when you start with the lawyers, they don't want, we can't give up anything. Everything's extremely important. And it's like, well, we know that's not the case. You know, everything's not number one priority. Sorry, it's not. And there's the fact that you're here, your team's here, our team's here, because our company and your company actually want to make this work, because it'll actually be a win-win for both companies. So let's find out legally, how do we get to an agreeable contract? But it's about finding the win-win. But there are situations, particularly you see this a lot in the public debates. It doesn't have to be a win-win. You know, like I said, Ben Shapiro and some of those, you look at it, and they can go in and I want to show that I am better than you and you don't know anything. Or they can go in with a win-win. How do we find a middle ground, and how do I try to convince you that my idea is correct and should be looked at? But those are fun to watch.
Yes, they are.
And they have some great techniques in there. We'll have to do a show on it because there are some amazing techniques that some of those people use, and that you can use in everyday life and in a lot of these other situations. But it's interesting, how do you address and say actual things that can really put people in their place and or win their favor.
Yes.
And so we'll make that a topic for another time. But planning your outcomes and trying to figure out what you want up front will help you get what you want.
Yep. Yeah, that's for sure. That would definitely, well, and it gives you a minute to think about what's going on as well. And like I said at the beginning, if you've got it planned out and you're the one who's delivering the conversation, this is the take a moment to breathe and relax and let the other party absorb it, because if they didn't know it was coming, they kind of already feel like they're knocked off their feet. So giving them a moment to recover before you continue on with the conversation at least gives them a chance where it feels like they're not getting completely run over, and it's actually a conversation and not a beatdown, so to speak.
And you will deal with people who are very reasonable, some that are in the middle of the road, and you'll occasionally deal with people who just are unreasonable. And sometimes you can't do anything about it. This is a funny story. I was doing a huge project for a large telco, and I won't say who, and we were working with several divisions. So the project spanned several divisions. And the division that was driving it really hated one of the other divisions. And he actually came to me and said, I was like, here are the things we're doing, we want to do this and that. And he says, well, any of these screw the other division? Because if it does, we're doing that. And you do get people who are unreasonable. It's like, and you're sitting there, you're all on the same team. It's the same company. but trying to find people to get them to a reasonable point. And sometimes you can, and a few times you can't, but you will deal with all kinds.
Yeah.
And one of the things, and I think we talked about this mindset for quite a while, and it also plays into framework and other things, is really having no emotion, taking
Yes.
nothing personal. And when I was young, I didn't understand that, and I was fortunate that I had a mentor who taught me. It took me a while to learn it. I was hard headed, but made me learn that you don't fire off the emails. My mentor, Ray Shaw, who I had the honor of working for with many, many years, and we stayed close friends, and he's been retired for a long time now, taught me a lot about that. Because when I was young and hot headed, the emails and the comments and the text would fly. And that doesn't get you anywhere. And he finally broke me of that by going through one of the techniques is if it's something that pisses you off, you can't send it till the next day. Because then you always think about it overnight and you're like, okay, that was kind of harsh. I really shouldn't say that, and I didn't have to bring up his mother, you learn to control your emotions and not take everything personal. And then I had a real life example happen, and another gentleman I worked with, and who was my my boss. He was VP at the time for a while before I took over his place. And again, not real names. Dave called me in and showed me what that was really about, and it was an eye-opening, shocking situation. I was stunned. He calls me up. He says, I've got this multi-million-dollar project going on, and there's millions and millions to come out of this. And I want you to come and take over because right now the car's off the road, upside down in the ditch, and is on fire. It's like, great. Okay. He says, we're going to go talk to the client, and they are pissed off. But I need to get them to sign the contract for phase 2, multi-million phase 2 contract. And we went in, and I had never been in this situation. I mean, I've been in a lot of high stress situation, but they lay into him. There's about 4 of them, 4 of their executives. And Dave and myself, and they lay into him for an hour. You're a friggin' moron. I'm not sure why we're working with you. And Dave, for an hour, took it. You're probably right. But for an hour, he took this literal abuse, verbal abuse. And I sat there and I was shocked and embarrassed at the same time for him, because they are just pounding him. And one of the others would chime in, you are an idiot. You realize that. You are an idiot. And he'd say, yeah, you're probably right. My wife says that a lot. But what was very interesting out of it is during the whole time, he talked to them about, yes, we have screwed up. Yes, I'm an idiot. Yes, I'm a moron. But we both need to salvage this. And to salvage it, we need to do phase 2. So please sign the contract for $3 million. And halfway through it, I'm thinking, these people are never going to sign this. And he kept talking through the whole thing, took it all, no emotion, and they signed it. And I took it over and we turned it around, but it was funny because we walked out of there and I was like, holy crap. I said, are you okay? He says, what do you mean? I just made $100,000 commission and we're having steak and whiskey for lunch. Let's go. He had a goal, and he totally took emotion out of it. Oftentimes when I'm negotiating with the lawyers, it's the same thing. You have to be able to take emotion out of it if you want to get your outcome that you want.
So if you have your goal and you're focused on it, and you take all the crap, you come out the other side, but you achieve your goal,
You won.
I guess the conversation wasn't that difficult after all.
Sitting there for me, just
Well,
watching it, I felt bad for. I mean, it was like, holy
yeah,
crap, And now he's bringing me into this, and I'm watching the heat and everything that's going down, and feeling bad for him because I know him. But through it all, it rolled off his shoulders like water, and darn if he didn't get the deal signed.
yeah. Well, it goes back to the the other episode that I did on the take the power of a conversation. If you or your team or whatever, there's a problem and there's a mistake, and you accept accountability and responsibility for it, say, yes, you're correct. This is my mistake. We made this. My team's mistake. We made this. We're going to do what it takes to make it right, which means we have to do this. When you take that accountability and responsibility, you have all the power of the conversation. What more can they say at that point? You've accepted it and you're moving forward and you're going to fix it. You're in control.
And to this day, I'm still friends with him. And the people that we had that conversation with, the executive team, are still friends with him. I mean, it's amazing. But if you take emotion out of it and you get to the point that's going to be a win-win for both sides, even if you've done something wrong and you've taken, you've owned up to it, things can work out really well.
Yeah. Excellent. So how about the other side? How about when a difficult conversation comes to you and it's completely unexpected? What's the best way to handle that?
Well, I find, and I forget who I read, wasn't one of Jordan's pieces, but another piece on, we oftentimes see things coming. We just ignore it.
Yes.
But what I do in those situations, and what I recommend for people to do, is immediately think about what you want your outcomes to be. Think about taking out the emotional part if it can be. I've had times where I've been let go, and I've had times where I've walked out of companies. And in both cases, I look at them as opportunities.
Yeah. There's always an opportunity. Sometimes you may not see it at the time, but it's there's always opportunity and growth.
And one of the things and I have this talk with every company I do sales for, the talk I have with them is up front of, this is what I'm expecting. I'm expecting to do this, this, and this. And
Yeah.
one of the things that in sales, they always ask you, well, if you don't make your numbers, if you don't do this, if you don't do that, we're going to ask you to leave. And the conversation I have with them is, you won't have to have that conversation. Because if I can't make my numbers, if I can't be successful here, I'm not going to be here. It's got to be a win-win all the way around. You have to know when to quit and move on.
Yeah.
You're not going to have to tell me that. If I haven't gotten to these points in X amount of time, I'm going to have the conversation with you. For whatever reason, it's not working out here. It might be the way the company's positioned. It might be me.
Could be a number of factors.
Yeah.
Could be, the product doesn't meet the value or the price point of it. Their target customers, maybe they're not targeting the correct customers for their product. Yeah.
And you can have those conversations up front, and you can have those conversations prepared. I had one scenario where the CEO came to me and said, "I want to have a talk with you." And unless you're blind, you tend to know what's going on. You tend to know how you've performed or how the company's performed. A lot of things are outside your control sometimes. But I said, "Well, that's great, because I wanted to have a conversation with you," which I really didn't. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. But you can take a difficult situation and work it to both of your favors.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went into the conversation saying, I'm pretty sure this is about where we are performance-wise as a company. You're not getting what you want. I can't achieve what you want, given, what I've got here. It's time to change this. And so you can control the difficult conversation and make it a win-win for both of you.
Yeah.
Because I've let go and fired a lot of people. You don't like having that conversation either. Because oftentimes, I had another good friend who they put him on plan and were letting him go from another large software company. And he came to me, well, they put me on plan, so I'm just going to make the plan, and then everything will be fine. And I said to that person, well, you realize once they put you on plan, you're gone. There's no one I've ever seen do the plan that they kept. Putting you on plan is just a kind step to getting you out the door. But he wouldn't recognize that. No, I worked the plan, they'll keep me. And he worked very hard. I'm not sure if he actually made the plan or not. I think he was pretty close. But they got rid of him anyhow. Understanding the situation and what's happening and taking control of it and making it a win-win for everybody will do you a lot of good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So I know we're running long. Cover one more mindset real quick.
Sure.
Countering.
Yeah, I was just going to get to that.
And handling responses and actions, because whether you're blindsided or not, how you respond and how they respond is one of the challenging things of difficult conversations, because you want to be able to handle those responses as best as you can. Jane, the woman I mentioned, who was the first woman I had to fire, got very emotionally upset. But I was able to talk her down from that, because I was not firing her. I was just moving her to a different situation. But being able to respond to those things where it's sometimes difficult, like I mentioned with the military and the Army, if you're delivering very bad news of loss of a loved one, you never know how those people are going to respond. Might be a single mom, it might be a mom and a dad, it could be a whole family, and you have to be prepared to handle and deal with whatever response is thrown at you. If it's a single mom, you have to be prepared to catch her if she collapses. It might be a mom or a dad who has 50 million questions. What happened? Could this have happened to my daughter or my son? And you have to be able to respond to those very reasonably. And then it can be the extremes of, you get people who are angry. It's your fault. Why were my kids not protected? Why do the police not protect? How could this happen? And you have to be able to respond to those things. And that happens, in business also, because as I mentioned, um, I've dealt with businesses where I've gone in and done the troubleshooting, and sometimes you have to come back and tell them their baby's ugly. I had a particular company went out there and they're trying to run like terabytes worth of data back then, and back then that was a lot. And you needed 10, 15 processors, and they're trying to run it like on a desktop PC and can't understand why it's not running. And you have to go to them and say, well, if you look at the minimal requirements, you can't run this on this type of such a small piece of hardware. Will never run, whether it's our product or another. You get back in the days when they did a lot of developing their own systems. One of the worst ones I had to deal with was I was talking to the CEO and the CIO of the company, and they built this huge application, want to know why it won't run on our database and system. And it's like, well, it's not the hardware. It's not our software. I know you spent a year and a half building this thing, but it's ugly. You could have not written the code any worse. This thing will never run. You need to start almost from scratch. And for a company that, spent a year and a half and a lot of dollars building something like that, you just called their baby ugly. And it, and you can't, please everyone. There are always going to be people that are unreasonable, and there are always people that are going to be unhappy. One of the things I liked about the troubleshooting was, you either walked away. It really only had two results. You either walked away the hero because you fixed it. Oh, you're a god. You walked on water. You're our savior. Whatever. Or they hated you. I can't believe the company sent you out. You don't know shit. You did absolutely nothing for us. And they are right to a certain degree. I absolutely did nothing for them, minus identifying what the real problem was. Unfortunately, it wasn't our problem. But
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. We've run long.
Well, we've ran a little long. I dropped the link in the chat if anybody wants to call in and ask any questions or have any input on that. You can. I like this one from T Smash. Follow the 3 C's: cool, calm, and collected.
Absolutely.
For difficult conversations, that's one for sure. This is actually a decent follow-up question Steph has. How does one have a difficult conversation over a sensitive millennial snowflake?
That is a difficult one. Oftentimes the challenges are very emotional.
Yeah.
And anytime you're dealing with people who are overly emotional, it is a lot more challenging. And what you have to do is you can't take their emotions out of it, because that's who they are, but you can take your emotions out of it.
Yeah.
And that helps make the conversation go a lot smoother. Because when your emotions are in it, you're sitting there thinking, you dumbass, or whatever the situation happens to be. And that can cause you not to look at what you're really trying to accomplish, which is the outcome. I need to get this guy on the project, and he actually has to do some work, or we're never going to get there.
Yeah.
By getting mad, getting angry, and letting my emotions go, why the hell did I hire you? Is not going to get me to my outcome that I want. I had and this falls along that same lines. I had a gentleman who I was training to be a manager and run large multi-million-dollar projects. And he came to me one day and he was just frustrated. And he came to me and he says, "This sucks. I can't do this. I need all A-level players." And I laughed at him. I said, "Don't we all?" But the reality of life is you're only going to have a couple A-level players, because the reason they're A-level is because they don't flock together. When they flock together, they're not A-level players, and they like being A-level players. So you're going to have a few. You're going to have hopefully a lot of Bs, some Cs, and probably some Ds and Es. But as leader, you have to figure a way to get to your outcome and get them all to participate to get there.
Yes, indeed. That is the ultimate goal, is to get to your desired outcome, one way or another. That is the goal. So, I guess a follow up to that is precisely that: follow ups. When you have to have and do have difficult conversations, when do you follow up, and how do you know when not to?
Follow-ups can be difficult, and I still apply one of the mindsets about integrity. You need to look at when you're going to do a follow-up and agree to do a follow-up. Is it something A, you can actually do?
Mm-hmm.
B, be upfront about whether you can, whether it'll make a difference or not. But have the integrity to say, there is something I can do that will help, and then actually do it, or not committing to doing a follow-up because there's nothing that's going to change this situation.
Mm-hmm.
No matter, I can't come back. There's nothing I'm going to say or do that's going to come back and change that a parent who's lost a child.
Right.
But in other situations, there might be something you can do.
Yep.
I'm sorry for the loss of your son. Your younger son's having the same problems. Can I help you get him in Boy Scouts? Can I help you get him in Big Brothers, Big Sisters? If it's something you can do and you want to bring it up as a follow-up, there's nothing wrong with that, long as you commit to doing it. But you have to be very smart about whether you can actually do something or not, and will it make a difference to anybody?
Right. Good point. We've got a caller. I've never done this with 3, so we'll give this a try. We'll add him in here. Victor,
Hey
how are you doing this
guys.
evening?
Oh, I'm great. Still working, so
Excellent.
yeah. My question is like, how many times when you bring a difficult conversation, you actually bring a difficult solution or a solution to this conversation?
Well, it depends on the situation, and sometimes the solution or outcome that you want, which hopefully is a win-win for everyone, can be very challenging, particularly if you're doing something in the technology field. As an example, when I would have a difficult conversation after troubleshooting a particular situation, I might have to give them 10 steps to do that their IT team and their data team have to deal with to get to resolution. Oftentimes there are, I won't say difficult, but I'll say complex solutions to get to the outcome you want. But if you position it correctly, most people will be very open to it. What I find particularly in negotiations and different difficult conversations are people are looking for a solution. And whether it's complex or not complex, what will make them feel better and get them to be on the same team as you is that you have a solution and a plan. Complex or not, they'll be very accepting if you can give them a path to success.
How you usually bring up difficult conversation? I presume in sales, you was saying.
Like I said, you can run across it in pretty much everything you do, from just general life to sales. I find a lot of it in business negotiations around contracts, finding the correct legal terms and legal statements, and getting lawyers to agree on and or substitute is very challenging. But you do run into it a lot in sales. You do run into it a lot in operations and troubleshooting. I think, it was funny because, like I had mentioned, I did troubleshooting for a large software company, and every week you were dropped into different situations where the house is on fire. And you were either able to solve it, sometimes on the spot, or find the solution to solve it. Might take a week to implement or two, and you walked away the hero. And sometimes there's stuff you could identify but really can't do anything about. And so it was one of the fun, probably the most fun things I did, but it was also one of the more stressful. Even so, then arguing with lawyers, because it was always, you were either the hero or the bum, always. There was no in between.
Gotcha. And my last question would be, any good books to recommend?
As far as for negotiation or anything like that, actually, it even applies to difficult conversations. Is the 6-Minute X-Ray. Chase Hughes, I believe, is the author. The premise of the book is how to quickly identify the type of person that you're speaking with. Because if you can identify the characteristics and the traits of the person you're speaking with, it allows you to craft the conversation in the most effective way for that person. I'm in the middle of reading it again for the second time because it's there's a lot of information in there, and it's somewhat difficult to digest at one shot. But it's it's a good way to very quickly dissect someone's personality traits, so you know exactly how to speak to them on their level to make them see your point, and so you can understand how they're going to take the conversation as you deliver it. Do you have any others, Jerry?
What I'll do, because I don't have them in front of me, there's several I would recommend, and Bentley's going to repost this with the notes from this, covering the situations and the mindset. But I'll also add to the end of that, there are several different books I would recommend reading that will help you with negotiation and dealing with tough conversations and situations. But we'll add that to the end, and when he posts it, you'll have access to those URLs.
Yeah.
You're gonna post it like in the comment link, or
It'll be in the comments. Yes. I've got kind of a bit of an outline of tonight's conversation, and I'm gonna kind of post the bullet points on that to break it down. I'm probably gonna look at. I'm not entirely sure how to do it yet. I want to try to start to chapter some of these. I'm still new at this, but I'd like to break this one into chapters and put it with the bullet points we've got for tonight. And so I'll put the books in the comment section.
sounds good. I actually got one more if you're ready for it.
Sure.
What was the funniest moment of bringing up a conversation? And it was like very funny, like during like bringing it trouble times, but at the same time it came up as a trouble, but it came up as a funny part in your moment, like the best moment that you remember.
Well, I've got one, but I can't talk about it publicly here. Which, thank you for that, Victor. You kind of led into that. So, for those of you who aren't, join my channel membership or whatever. We're going to do a Zoom afterwards, as we always do, where we can talk about things we can't talk about on YouTube, and I can relay this story. It is funny. However, I cannot say some of this in public. YouTube would pull the video.
I see.
Jerry, do you have any that were difficult that went funny?
Again, I got to think about how I talk about these, but particularly if you have employees, you often run into difficult situations, and employees sometimes will tell you everything, and I like to use the term TMI, too much information. But they will come and tell you everything out of the blue. Sometimes they might come and tell you, why is my husband or wife not sleeping with me? And those are difficult conversations to have, because you can't have them. HR would be all over you, but you get caught in those situations. And at the time, you're somewhat panicking, but when you look back on them, they're actually very funny. I had someone said, "Wouldn't you love this body?" Like, how do you answer that? I'm your boss. This TMI, this is not a conversation that we can have. This is HR and all that other stuff. But you do run into a lot of maybe not funny at the time, but when you look back on them, they're hilarious, of what you get asked and told sometimes.
Do you allow it to give a recommendation, like if they ask you anything, or you just let it go, just listen and let it go?
Most of the time I let it go. Over time here in the US and pretty much most everywhere, the HR legal side of it has gotten to the point where you really can't say anything. And particularly nowadays, because you can get sued for everything. He looked at me funny, they can try to sue you. So you try to avoid those and push them off to, hey, that's an HR issue. You need to take that up with HR. But 20, 30 years ago, those happened more often. And when you look back on them, they're very funny because you're caught in this situation and there's no good answer.
We need to change the definition of HR instead of human resources. In my opinion, needs to be changed to hit and run. Let's just hit them with the truth and run away.
and yeah, and some of them are very funny. Some of them are sad. I had a guy that worked for me who was just this huge, and I'm a fairly big guy, but this guy was huge. And he was in my office one day, and we were discussing a project, and I'm looking, and his hands are all beat up. It's like, would you go 20 rounds with somebody? And I started to worry that, is this guy abusing his wife? That could be bad. And but it was actually the opposite way around. She was beating the crap out of him on a daily basis. And this is a big, bulking guy. But you run into things that you would never expect. And like I said, some of them are funny, some of them are sad. And how you deal with them sometimes are, you want to laugh and you want to cry sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bentley, for the show. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for calling in, Victor.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
You as well. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah. I do have a funny story on that note, not related to HR. The guy didn't work for me. I worked with him at the time, but years ago, like you said, big man, he was well known as being exceptionally strong. And he came into the driver's room one morning and both eyes are black, forehead's got a bruise on it, nose is swollen and obviously sore as hell. And we asked him, like, what the hell did you run into? My wife. I knew his wife. She wasn't that big of a woman. So I'm like, not quite sure how that one happened. You got to elaborate on that a little bit more. Like I said, drove truck for 30 years. He came home, didn't tell his wife he was coming home, came into the house in the middle of the night. She heard a noise, didn't know it was him, didn't know what to expect. So she snuck into the kitchen, grabbed a cast iron frying pan. As he came into the kitchen, she smacked him clear in the face with the cast iron frying pan. He had two black eyes, the mark with the prop of the frying pan across his head. And yeah, not exactly a difficult conversation, but certainly the along the lines of the wife abusing the guy where it was funny as could be. So anyhow, thank you very much, Jerry. I appreciate this. I learned a lot myself. I hope some of you guys did out there. And like I said, I'm going to try to figure out how to chapter this thing. And I'll be posting a comment with the bullet points of this conversation. And I'll link the book that I recommended, The 6 Minute X-Ray, and Jerry will get back to me with his list, and we'll link that one in the comments as well. And so, yeah, hopefully this gave some of you guys some clarity or some thought, better ways of handling, initiating, or whatever difficult conversations. And if this helped you or will help somebody you think, do me a favor, hit the like button and share it with somebody. Let's help kind of grow this channel. Like I say, we've kind of gone long. It's been a good one tonight, but we're going to continue the conversation in a few minutes over on in the community on the Zoom chat, and we'll tell the funny part of the story that we can't tell here publicly. So that's one of the benefits of joining. So anyhow, like I said, Jerry, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. Have a great night. And thank you all for joining me tonight. It's been a good show. So I don't have my topic picked out for next week yet. Stay tuned for that. We'll announce it like I always do. And we'll be here once again live next week, 8 o'clock Eastern time. Same place, same time, same stuff. Have a great night.